The lesson today is the downside of hero worship. I want to go into why we would have this tendency to put like elite athletes or celebrities or authors up on a pedestal, kind of separating them from us. And I want to use a personal example of how I kind of fell into this myself. Okay, so about 5-6 years ago, I was developing the free mind material that we teach, and I was researching on some of the origins of it. And I came across a couple of really interesting books from the 17th century Japan. One was by Takuan Soho called The Unfeathered Mind, who's a Zen Buddhist master. And his student, contemporary, his student, Yagu Munenori, a samurai, okay, teaching in what he called the Life-Giving Sword School. And that's the name of his book, too, obviously. So this was kind of a cool, finding for me. Like, oh, here we got a Zen master teaching a samurai about, how to develop a free mind. And I made this false assumption that Takuan was teaching Munenori Zen, okay? Maybe he was. We don't know exactly what was going on back then. All we have is like their books. But the books that Takuan wrote, that's in the Unfeathered Mind, like really does speak toward just like not Zen philosophy per se, but just how to use your attention better. So, false assumption. But that doesn't mean that they're not great books. In fact, they're really great books, and I highly recommend them. But at the same time, it's important to make sure that we're reading them in appropriate context. Okay, so this was all kind of revealed to me in a recent book I read, which is The Circle of the Way by Barbara O'Brien. And it's a history of Zen Buddhism, and she kind of describes how messy it can be, through all of the centuries, and how we can make this false assumption, specifically the false assumption that I made. So it's kind of cool, to be able to be called out like that. And so I just want to read from the book just where she's revealing this. And she starts off with talking about like what Zen teachers were doing during World War II, and then ties it back to the 17th century. So here she says, Zen teachers used the teachings of emptiness to justify slaughter, saying that no one would be killed. And this perversion of the teachings goes back at least to the 17th century, where we saw it in Takuan's treatise for the shogun's swordmaster. Well, who's the shogun's swordmaster? Yagu Munenori. Okay, so she goes on to say, and what does Buddhism teach about war? It says the first precept tells us to avoid taking life, period. It does not list conditions. Okay, so here I am. I made this false assumption or connection, and I learned something about my tendency to, make this association, putting Takuan and Munenori up there on a pedestal, thinking that they're kind of perfect. So what's going on here? Well, it's easy to make false assumptions. It gives our mind certainty, and Zen is cool, right? We can, it's kind of cool to have like, oh, free mind, has a lot to do with Zen. And it's also easy to put people up on pedestals because we kind of look at them, worship them, like seeing them as kind of perfect. Like they can do things, but, that's too hard for me. Like kind of making that separation, giving us excuses not to do our own work, so to speak. And we kind of see them as perfect, like flawless. And there's obviously limitations to that. Some of it is like we don't see them as equals, like equal human beings on their own learning journey. Like we see that we have like flaws and challenges and doubts, and we don't see other people, or like these people that we're making out to be heroes that we worship, we don't see them in the same light. When in reality, they're just on their own learning journey. They have flaws. And so, for example, if Takuan was really thinking that he's teaching Munenori about Zen precepts and principles, then he was mistaken. He's teaching him something else, something around meditation, and how that can kind of calm the mind, maybe clear the mind, use attention more effectively, things like that. So we all have flaws, and we're all on our own learning journey. We make mistakes, we make these false assumptions, we have successes too, but that's all part of our learning journey, ours and everyone else's. So when we can see others, especially like these people we might have a tendency to put on that pedestal, when we see them more as equals, then we bring them down to earth, so to speak, and we see that we can do similar work that they are doing, that we admire and respect in them. And we start taking ownership of our own challenges, our own learning journey. We become leaders of ourselves, where we can include a healthy dose of skepticism about information that we're reading or being exposed to. We become leaders of ourselves. So that's important, right? Because mental training has a lot to do with attention. That's its central theme. And if we really look at developing a free mind, so that it's not holding our attention prisoner, so to speak, then we can use our attention more effectively in all kinds of challenges in our lives, specifically challenges around working and collaborating with other people. So that's the lesson. You can go to WWII.com, check out the text on the lesson. You can check out our upcoming courses on developing a free mind. And you can check out our books. So I encourage you to begin and continue your mental training journey.